Welcome, everyone, to Special Education Legal Fund's August Back to School webinar with advice and tips from our favorite special education advocates. We've got a great panel for you tonight, and we're really excited to kick it off. My name is Christine Lai, and I'm the Executive Director and Co-founder of Special Education Legal Fund. Before we begin, I'd like to thank tonight's featured sponsor, Winston Preparatory School. Winston Prep's model is based on an in-depth understanding of each student, which results in grouping by learning profile and in precisely designed programming for each individual student. Winston students have a variety of learning differences, including dyslexia, nonverbal learning disabilities, and executive functioning challenges, including ADHD. Grounded in research, Winston creates a successful educational environment where students are able to flourish and become independent learners. So thank you, Winston. On that note, I'd also like to extend a tremendous thank you to our 2023 corporate sponsors whose generous support make this webinar program, as well as so much else of what we do, possible. I'd like to acknowledge WealthSpire Advisors at the Platinum level and Winston Preparatory School at the Gold level. At the Silver level, we are incredibly grateful for the support of Fusion Academy, Villa Maria School, Eagle Hill School, and Chapel Haven. And finally, we are grateful to the Pinnacle School and the Spire School, as well as Shrub Oak International School, our bronze level sponsors. Thank you again to our corporate partners. For those of you who aren't familiar with Special Education Legal Fund, I'd like to take a moment to introduce ourselves. Special Education Legal Fund was founded in 2018 to provide resources, knowledge, and support to families in need with children in the special education system. Since then, we have provided nearly $800,000 in grants for legal support to over 200 families across 70 school districts in Connecticut and Westchester County, New York. Over the past 5 years, those grants have yielded over $9.8 million in educational improvements for the students receiving those grants. Our legal assistance program and our advocacy support program are currently accepting applications. The legal assistance program is our flagship attorney program, and it provides grants of $6,000 to qualifying families, while our advocacy support program provides families with $1,000 of support from a qualified special education advocate. You can visit our website at www.spedlegalfund.org to begin the grant application process with a pre-screen. We process grants on a monthly basis, and the following deadlines do not change no matter what month it is. The 15th is the deadline for applications and documents. The 22nd is the deadline for phone interviews, and we notify all families of the decision of the grants review committee at the end of the month in which they apply. So please visit our website if you are interested in more information. Little plug for our September webinar on September 20th. We're bringing back an oldie but goodie, What is Outplacement? This is one of our most popular webinars every year. We do it every year, so do it sometimes twice a year. And this year's panel, we're going to have Andy Feinstein, Meredith Braxton, and Courtney Spencer to talk about the ins and outs of outplacement for families. And you can register for all of these via Eventbrite, the way that you registered for this webinar. I will put this link into the chat once we get out of this presentation. I'm also very pleased to announce that we're launching our Lunch and Learn series this year. This is a 5-part series with special education advocate and self-board member Virginia Blum, where each month she's going to tackle a topic of interest for families, starting with the referral process on September 19th. In October, we're going to talk about eligibility determination. November is prior written notice, and January is present levels of performance. And then finally, we're going to finish the series with preparing for the annual review meeting in February. So please join us. This is going to be a lunchtime, quick and dirty, learn about a topic in special education that you have questions on or are interested in. And finally, this is my last plug, I swear. Please join us on October 1st, Sunday from 2 to 5 at the Stamford JCC for our first ever self-resource fair. We have about 50, actually 48 exhibitors that are joining us, special education schools, advocates, attorneys, therapists, recreational centers, and employment centers, all here to talk to families about the services that they provide. So we're really excited to bring that to you guys. If you know me at all, a resource fair is something that I've wanted to do for about 15 years. So I'm finally pulling it together, and I'm really excited. So that again is October 1st from 2 to 5 at the Stanford JCC. Registration also via Eventbrite. So finally, we get to the good stuff. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our panelists, starting with Dani Cohen. Dani is a non-attorney special education advocate for now with the law offices of Robin Keller in Norwalk, and she recently completed her doctorate in educational leadership. Dani has broad experience across the board in special education, including as a teacher, as an administrator, and as an assistant director of pupil personnel services. This is Dani's second appearance in a self webinar. Perfect. And we're really pleased to welcome her back. Our next panelist is Stacey Tie. Stacey is a tremendous advocate for students and families, and we're so pleased to have her back on this very special panel for her 10th go round with us. Stacey comes to us from the law offices of Laura Hennigan and has extensive experience supporting families through the special education process, bolstered by her advocacy coursework and additional certifications in mental health. And so welcome to the panel, Stacey. And Stacey's also super cool and fun, by the way. Next, we have Jill Chuckas. Jill has over 25 years of experience advocating for children with special education challenges, and she works so hard to support families and students so they can achieve success in the appropriate learning environment. Jill's experience is both broad and deep, drawing on her background as a social worker in social services and in psychology. Jill has been a self-panelist really, countless times, has been a self-friend since the beginning, and we are blessed to have her back this evening. So welcome back, Jill. And finally, last but not least, certainly not least, we are super excited to welcome Allie Grafman to her very first self-webinar panel. Allie has almost a decade of experience as a special education advocate, and her focus is on supporting her students by utilizing her experience as a special education teacher and administrator, as well as her work on behalf of students and families to help them navigate the special education process. So thank you, Allie. Just because this wouldn't be a webinar without a disclaimer, this webinar panel is presented for informational purposes only. This webinar is intended as a resource for families who are navigating the special education system in Connecticut or New York, and is not intended to provide legal support, advice, or assistance to any particular individual, nor is it intended to replace the advice and counsel of a qualified special education attorney. Families in need of legal advice, support, or assistance should contact a special education attorney licensed to practice in New York or Connecticut to discuss the specific needs of their individual student. This webinar should not be construed as an endorsement by Special Education Legal Fund or any of its representatives of any of the participating attorneys, advocates, or other professionals in the panel, nor should it be construed as an endorsement of any school or school representative invited to appear on the panel. And with that, here we go. So as I said before we started this panel, I really haven't, done a lot in terms of preparing for this because, you all are such great colleagues and you work together so well. I just wanted to kind of throw the floor open to all of you. We're starting a new school year. A lot of schools started today, yesterday, the past, few days. What are 3 things that every parent should do, every parent of a child with an IEP or a 504 plan do at the beginning of the school year? Dani, would you like to go first because you're unmuted?
Sure, will. I would say the first thing to do is to say hello to your general education teacher in the classroom, get to know them. The second would be to get to know your case manager. They typically will reach out to you first, but it doesn't hurt to throw the email back over to them and really open up a nice line of communication. And the last item would be to start preparing for all the paperwork you're going to get now. have a nice little folder where you're going to collect all of the invitations or IEPs or your own little data resources of their schoolwork that you're getting home. A nice little folder to have it in, just to be on a good, start off for the school year.
Perfect. Wonderful.
I want to piggyback on Dani, because there's
Awesome.
one thing you hit on, and I know what you were thinking. But one of the things I talk to my parents a lot about is doing some type of little intro letter, so that as you get to know your case manager, because some of you will have just a general ed teacher and a special ed teacher, but many of you will have a multitude of related services people and para educators and new administrators and all kinds of things. So one of the things that, and actually I got this from one of my families, and I've held on to it ever since, is just a nice little intro letter. This is my kid. This is what they're really great at. This is what I love about them. And here's a few places, that they struggle. So, this is how often I like to talk to you. These are the kinds of things, just so that there's expectations that are set up. Because I think a lot of parents, it's not a mistake, but they make an assumption that what you said, Dani, before, is that somebody's going to reach out to them. And I can't tell you how often I'll have parents who say, I have no idea who my case manager is. I haven't heard from anybody. So just having something ready to kind of send out as a first week of school type of thing. I love doing that.
And Jill, I would add to that and say to also include a photo of your child, because it really humanizes that this is a person that we're all talking about, not just a piece of paper with numbers.
Right.
I love that, because, we spend a lot of time as parents of, children in special education talking about their, what they have, their challenges, but it's equally important to talk about their strengths, because very often their strengths are the way in which they're going to, see their way through the challenges. They're going to overcome the challenges. They're going to get past the challenges. So I really love that. I think that's a great tip. Allie, what are your, suggestions for the start of the school year?
Was just going to really enhance what both Dani and Jill were saying. Sum it up with the 3 C's: collaborate, communicate, and coordinate. Okay, that makes sense. And it's very similar to what you said. Collaboration, work with the teachers at the onset of school to say that we're a team. It's not you against me. You're working for the sake of your kid. So that collaboration, showing honest effort and willingness to work together and build together, because that's going to set the stage, I believe, for the year to come. The coordination is basically what you were saying, Jill, making sure that the teachers have, an introductory letter, but also in line with that is to ask the teachers, if you have a child with an IEP or a 504, do the general ed teachers and all of the, the special teachers, art, music, PE, do they have my kids' IEP, especially the accommodations? Because we often assume that all the teachers, especially middle school and high school, when you've got, more than just one, that they know my kid. And that's not necessarily true, at least the first, couple of weeks of school. So if they have the IEP with the accommodations, that really sets the stage. And then thirdly, that communication. Be eager, and it's not being forceful, but certainly make the effort to either email them. They don't like a flood of phone calls in the beginning, especially the first week of school.
Oh, yeah.
Email them, or, a friendly hi, if there's anything that I can do to help, let me know. So that communication is really essential. And then just look at the year in a positive manner. I think if you have that mindset to say to yourself, this is going to be a good year, and then hopefully you will be right.
Mind over matter. Stacey?
Everything that everybody said, I echo. I would add, when you're writing an introduction letter, do keep it kind of short. Don't write a novel.
1-pager.
I would say 1 or 2 paragraphs, honestly, because they have a lot of, depending on if your kid's in elementary school versus in middle school or high school, they could have a really big caseload. So You want them to pick up on the key points. And I would also add that maybe you should ask if you don't have it already, ask for your child's schedule so that you can see when they're going to their services and that you have an idea what their day looks like. It helps you so you understand what their day looks like. It helps you communicate with your team. It also helps you when your child comes home from school so you can say, how did your day go? And we all get oh, it was fine. Well, you can ask, oh, I saw that you had art today. So what did you do in art today? And you'll get more from your kids when you have more information about what their day is like, so you can get more feedback from them about the day. And then, when you're working with your team to establish communication, what is the best way for your team to communicate together? Every client is different. Every team is different. Some teams, they do bi-weekly phone calls. Some teams do monthly team meetings. Some teams share a Google Doc and people update it at certain points in time. So that's something that you need to work out with your team of how you guys want to communicate and how often and what you want to communicate to each other.
That's a great point. And that actually segues really nicely into my next question, which all of you sort of touched on, which has to do with communication. How do you set communication guidelines with your school? How much is too much? How much contact is it reasonable for you to ask for? I am really big on advising, my families to lean on written communication. To not to speak on the phone, not to talk in the hallway. If you do those things, then follow up with an email after the fact. Can you talk a little bit more about sort of establishing those, not using text message? Can you talk a little bit more about, establishing communication guidelines at the start of the year?
Yeah, I think it depends on the student. Some students require more communication with team members than other students. I think that that's something that we always discuss in PPTs, and we manage that expectations and even put it into the IEP. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, like you said, Christine, if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. So if you had a phone call with a team member, you do need to follow up with an email that says, I appreciate your time. This is my understanding of the conversation. These are the next steps. And then you also need to write, please put this email in my child's academic file, mm-hmm. because emails don't always go into the child's academic file. So you need to ask that the email be added to the child's academic file so that it's kept there so you have a record. I also tell my clients that in your email box, add a folder so that that says, student A, communications, and then you can put all those emails in that folder so you have it right there so you can go to and you're not searching your email to find it. So you want to make sure that you also say, please put this in the academic file, and then you have your own way of filing your email communications.
To piggyback off, sorry.
That's okay.
Dani, go ahead, and then Jill can go next.
To piggyback off of Stacey, so the E in email is evidence, and it's only so that way everybody has a record. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that.
Spoken like a burgeoning lawyer.
I know. Robin has drilled that into my brain, that E in email is evidence. And also, you have to remember your school team are not mind readers. So if little Timmy comes home and says they hate school, they have no idea. You've got to communicate that over with the team, so that way they could try to figure out what's going on in school to try to help little Timmy do better. So I actually think more communication's better. The mm-hmm. more they know of what's going on, the more they're going to be able to react. But if you let everything pile up, then you get to one of those really nerve-wracking PPTs where you're unleashing everything. And that's mm-hmm. not what you want. You want to keep it collaborative and open. And
no one's going to remember that if you're just, unleashing your litany of woes all at one time as well. Jill?
Yeah, I'm typing in a response. We had a question in the chat, so I was just typing.
Oh, good. At least somebody's looking at the chat.
Yep. That was my job in a lot of these. So, okay. So I was going to piggyback a little bit more on what Stacey was saying as well. I always ask for it to be written in the accommodations. When our communication is going to happen, what the frequency is and what the avenue is. I always ask that it's written. I do have some teams that want to insist certain districts prefer to do a phone call every 2 weeks. And I will always say to my parents exactly what others have already said, which is, you have that phone call, no problem. Type it up afterwards and send it on to them. But it's so important to have an expectation of when that communication is going to happen and how it's going to happen. And the other aspect of that is, if your child has a number of team members, you may also want to ask for a frequent team meeting of some sort. So for some kids, that is monthly. There's 10 service providers. We need to sit monthly. For some kids, it's quarterly. Sometimes it's twice a year. But that's also very realistic. And that would be something I would put in that intro level letter to say, my expectation for communication is X. And, what would be easiest for you? A simple email? Do you have a form? Do you have a Google Doc? Like, I would leave that, how they're going to write it down for me, up to the school team to make it easier. But I would also make sure that they understand it's not that you just want information from the case manager.
Right.
You want information from the related service providers. You want a little snippet from the general ed teacher.
And you don't just want information when stuff is going wrong.
Correct.
Yes,
Correct.
exactly.
I mean, that's kind of the, the idea is that, you develop a free flowing exchange of information that's not just, Timmy bit somebody today or whatever it is.
Right.
It has to encompass the, the highs and the lows, and all the things that you're working on.
Right. I mean, years ago, a lot of the kids would come with the little notebook that they get, like the daily journal. And sometimes in the elementary school, that is still happening. If we have a one-on-one paraeducator who's writing some notes in for the family. But I really do prefer some type of spreadsheet, whatever format makes the most sense, because then it can be live. And you can add in, the parent can add in something, but I would very much set that expectation on day one, and let them know, and make sure it's written in the IEP. And it looks like we have 3 Dani Cohen.
I
am going to remove the other Dani Cohen.
I think that's Robin.
Mind,
the only thing I would add to that, and I agree, it should be written and it should be in the IEP. And also I would have it written on a 504 as well.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, how often as parents do your kids come home and you say, how was school today? Okay.
Right.
That's what you get.
Nobody can depend on the kids for anything.
Right. Or, and then a nonverbal kid, that
Absolutely.
doesn't have any expectations. But one thing that it's important, I think, that I'd like to mention is you need to decide what communication you need. What information do you need that's specific to your child? Because if you say we just need to, communicate, anything can go into that communication.
Right.
You want communication about
specific things, like specific items that you are tracking. Right.
Is he blurring out in class? Whatever it is, whatever the concerns are. I often work with my clients, as you, I think, mentioned, Jill, a spreadsheet where it has all of those items.
Those questions.
Yes. And then, either the parent or the teacher checks it and comments on it. But you really need to kind of hone in on what information is
important to you. Right. Yeah. Because they're
not
on
that
Oh, sorry. For sure. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, on that spreadsheet, what I also like to do is I like to have the service providers update when they have provided service, because that's an extra look for you as a log to see when you're getting services.
Absolutely.
Or when a service is missed.
And a communication log like that also extends over to high school. And Jill, I'm sure you remember back in the day, but I had one when I was a teacher that I would have every teacher complete, and it had also upcoming assignments to look out for. Those are my kiddos that need more executive functioning help. Were they on time, etc.? And every teacher filled it out, and we saved every single day in the same document, so you could access any day.
Well, they were supposed to, Dani, but your teachers didn't always do it.
Listen, I did my.
You had it set up for them.
You did her best.
You brought them to the water. They did not drink.
Yes.
This is actually really, and this goes into, another, area of this sort of communication conundrum or communication issue is, is how do you, well, it's sort of a two-parter, is how do you make sure that your student is receiving their supports and related services? And I think we sort of touched on that with this, the spreadsheet. And also, more broadly, how do you track the progress that your student is making? And can you use this method of communication or whatever communication that you develop to do that?
Yeah, who
Dani's
wants
the
to take
data
that
girl.
one?
Yeah,
Oh,
Dani's,
gosh.
Dani's taking it. Dani's the data girl.
You're gonna start it,
Data.
and I'll piggyback on you, Dani.
Yes,
How's that?
I
Start.
love it, Jill. I love it. So data is everything. So you can utilize that communication log as one point of data. You could see if the homeworks are late right there on that chart, because Power School, typically it's only going to mark it that it came. Some teachers will mark that it's late. But I'm more into the data. So if you think down to goals and objectives specifically, and they say that little Timmy, again, poor Timmy in this meeting, is going to get themselves at 95% mastery. Where did they start from? Where are they now?
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to tell me that we're making progress, I want to see where 25 is and that we've made a good first step in the right direction. I very much analyze data every single time. It is so important to, when you get your progress marks, specifically your goals and objectives progress marks, not the ones you get with the report card, that if it has generic, satisfactory, is making progress, that's not enough. And you should be turning back to your teacher and saying, can you give me more specific information? What do you mean by this?
So I agree 100%, and it starts with the IEP. You're right, Dani. The goals, the objectives under each goal have to be specific and measurable. And I would say more frequently than not, they are not measurable. Oftentimes districts will say, I'll take your Timmy will increase, 80%, but where's the baseline? And how are you going to measure that? In a graph form? Are you going to measure it with check marks? Anything that says just teacher observation as a form of progress monitoring is a no-no, okay? In my book, okay? You can observe, a teacher can observe, but it has to be structured observations with data that accompanies it. So it's all in the development of the IEP to hold teachers and staff accountable for your child's progress.
The other layer of that too is everyone has now been forced to embrace our new IEP document. And one of the things on the old IEP document that we had was we had to put evaluation procedures, and there was data collection, pre and post, all these different myriad of things that we could choose to utilize. And it's not as clear on the new format what kind of data they're using. So one of the things that I've been working on with my teams and with my families is explicitly writing it into the objectives so that it will say, via pre and post line data. Or for example, if we're working on explicit reading areas, I typically will make sure that in our accommodations, we have a very clearly outlined reading progress monitoring plan, but we might be using one of those tools. For example, there's a tool called the PAST, which is the Phonemic Awareness Screening Test. And it has 4 forms. So we can use that 4 times a year. It's awesome, right? So sometimes we'll write that in as measured by the PAST quarterly, so we could do things like that, which becomes very important. Another thing that I've been doing more frequently as well, particularly with my high school students, is often our high school students have a lot of writing goals, and they'll say 4 out of 5 work samples. And then the school team grabs 4 out of 5 work samples across the course of an entire year, one from each course. And the kid did good on 4 out of 5 of them through the entire year, but couldn't do it for the rest. So another thing I'll have written in there is 4 out of 5 trials monthly or weekly. or whatever it's going to be.
In the
that's
same
that's
subject
appropriate.
or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. So I'll
Right.
really have that, and that's to both Dani and Allie's point, is to really have it as very crystal clear as possible
Mhm.
as to how we are going to measure this. And then if it's written on there, guys, and you're feeling like my kid's not making progress, you can say, show me the money, right?
Right.
Show me the data.
Right.
I
Yep.
want to see it.
And you should, to piggyback on Jill real quick, you should ask for the data often, because you have to picture, when I'm going to use a general example, your child goes from one grade to the next. It's like that teacher could be picking up from nothing. So if you have the data, you could say, here you
Right.
go. This
Right.
is where we left
Here's a
off. You don't need
baseline.
to.
This is where we left off
Exactly.
in June.
Which is actually a really good thing for parents to be aware of. And some of you may have organically kind of noticed this, and it's frustrating as all get 'em, is that you go from one teacher to the next, and sometimes they don't get the file on your kid.
Yeah.
And you're mid IEP and they're saying, oh, we're rebaselining that. Like, are you kidding me? Aren't you the same district? Sometimes it's goes from building to building, and that I have maybe a little bit of empathy
Right.
that they've gone from the middle to the high school or something. But when it's literally, it's the person in the next room,
Right.
so just
It's
as a
hard
parent,
to, it's hard to.
as a
really-
parent, be aware of that. That's
Mhm.
sometimes.
And that's becoming more of an issue with the teacher shortage, because the
So much
turnover.
so.
I had a
Right.
student last year that had 5 different special ed teachers,
Yep.
and
Wow.
in one school year. So
yeah.
that's even, it's becoming even more important to track that.
Mhm.
And so you go back to the beginning of our conversation, start your anecdote, your
Right.
introduction email with every new special ed teacher.
The
or
Google
every new-
document is important in this case,
Yes.
Right.
Because everybody's looking at it and it shows that history.
So,
Yep.
so
Right.
I just want to make one more quick point. Data is important, but how do we report it? Okay. And if you take a PPT and going over all your goals and objectives and report data, the PPT will, you're not going to get through it. So I like to use those team meetings to report data. And what I like to have my clients do is to write an agenda for those team meetings, to really hone in on specific goals and objectives or subject areas, whatever. Say, I would like the data in the writing goal or whatever it is, because it's too much to cover in
And that's a great tip about the agenda, because obviously, like, a lot of times we sit down and we, maybe we haven't prepared, maybe we have, maybe we looked at the IEP, maybe we haven't prepared. It's really, really good for a parent to do something like that. And that establishes, number one, that like you're not messing around. And number two, that these are the things that you want to cover during the course of the meeting. And that way, if you get to like topic 4 out of 6 and you haven't covered them all, you can then say, okay, it's our allotted time is over, let's reconvene so that we can talk about topics 5 and 6, which we didn't get to in this meeting. So I think that's great for framing the conversation. That's a great.
And
great
the
tip.
other important thing is to make sure you ask your team to send you the data, any reports, any evaluation, assessments, anything that they did and they want to present to you in a team meeting or a PPT. You want to ask them to send it to you at like at least 3 school days in advance. They're supposed to do it anyway, but you should kindly remind them to send it to you in writing beforehand so that you have time to review it and look at it. Your advocate, if you have an advocate, has time to look over it and meet with you and talk to you about it as well.
That's great. So we're starting out the year. It's August. September. I think we all start any school year with a lot of hope and an expectation. And and I think that kids start off and they're they get settled. There's the beginning of school, assemblies and things that are not scheduled. So there's a little bit of of settling in at the beginning of the year. How long does it take for you to determine if the IEP that you established in the previous spring is working for your child? How long do you give the team with the guidelines and everything that you've got going on to how long do you give them?
I can't wait to hear everybody's response.
Yeah, I was just thinking what you all say.
We're all different.
And I'm thinking beginning of the school year, right? So
Right.
I'm not talking about the IEP year, because your IEP year might start
Started in May or
March,
April or whatever.
Yep. But if we're talking about September 1st,
But let's be
whatever
realistic.
date,
Like, we had that meeting in the spring. Very
Right.
little was done, in between when you had that meeting in May and the end of the school year. So you're really talking about, this is the new team. It's a new IEP. How long do I give these
But,
people to
so
see
there's
if they're
so
doing
many
the right thing?
layers. There's so many layers of that, Christine, and you're making a perfect argument for why every child should have summer programming. Because
Yes.
if we have a March IEP and they have a break for 8 to 10 weeks because they didn't qualify for ESY for some God only knows what reason, then, we're starting all over again. So you're making an argument for every child getting ESY services. But then again, I am a little bit biased in this regard. If I'm thinking about where, and I've got if I'm thinking just September through June, and that being my baseline,
Yeah.
I want to be starting to have some traction by the beginning of October.
Yep.
I want to know that the kid is pretty settled in. If I'm hitting the 20th or the 23rd, 25th of October and things are still not going well, I'm calling a team meeting at minimum. And don't tell me it's because of all the candy from Halloween. It's not. But seriously,
Yeah. No, I believe it. I believe it. Yeah.
So to me, maybe about a 4-week, maybe 5-week if I have a really complicated kid. But yeah, that's me.
So I was going to say the same, 6 to 8 weeks, which end of October, that's when that would roll around. And I would say that also by then they have conducted their baseline global standardized assessments, which are the entire school is taking those typically. And it's giving you your first indication of where we are. I will say I've learned that not all districts give that out freely. So come October, you should ask, hey, did you guys do dibbles or anything like that?
Where's my ACE web?
Where's that? So I would ask for that. And that's a good indicator. In addition to that, look at the social emotional status of your kiddo. If they are not happy to go to school, there's a reason. It's not always going to be because he got into a fight on the playground.
Right.
It could very well be, I'm embarrassed because I don't want these kids to know I can't read.
Right.
Or follow these directions.
Right.
So use that as a temperature marker too. But data wise, I would say give the staff a good 6 to 8 weeks to really get data and be able to say, hey, could we chat about where we are?
Yeah, see, you're more generous than I am. I'm sorry, Allie. I'll let you go in. You're more generous than I am with timeline.
I'm with you. I'm with you,
you,
Jill. I actually pre-set up meetings in the spring. When I have PPTs in the spring, we're already putting in the IEP that we're meeting in October. And it's already in the IEP, so that it's already going to get scheduled.
That's also a great tip, just to have those, because if you wait till October, sometimes, it's like it might be a couple weeks, before something can get scheduled, and then you're into November, and then all these things kind of bleed into each other. So that's a great tip, Stacey. Allie, what would you like to contribute to this?
Everybody's on the same track here, but I do like to encourage all my clients to set up team meetings at least 6 to 8 weeks. So within that, 6 to 8 weeks time, you should have a team meeting and you will hear from the teachers specifically on different topics that you find that would be helpful information. But I also want to piggyback on what Dani said about looking at those social emotional cues from your kid. You need to be a detective as a parent. Has your kid's personality changed? Is your child overwhelmed with homework? Right. Or is he or she not doing any homework at all? Right. Especially in the upper grades, that there's something going on. How much time is your child talking with friends or going on the whatever medium they use on the phone? Are they
the Instagram?
No, they do Snapchat.
I know the Snapchat.
They're not the face.
They're not using the Facebook, everybody.
They probably have more things to it than I can ever imagine. But you need to read your child's verbal and nonverbal cues, because that will tell you, as a parent or guardian, your child the best.
Mhm.
So if you see a change or any disturbance, you get right into the school and inquire about it. And the first and
Absolutely.
foremost person would be the case manager and or the general ed teacher.
That's a great point. I think that it's a really great point to underscore that, you know, that behavior is communication. You know,
Right.
there are very few kids that will walk up to their parent and say, I feel anxious, you know, about school. What they're more likely to say is, I have a stomach ache, or I have a headache, or, you know, or they're tired and they are, you know, going to sleep at 7 o'clock at night when, you know, previously they could stay up till. So all these things, you know, you're absolutely right, Allie, you know, are, you know, little, you know, breadcrumbs or clues into trying to figure out like exactly what's, you know, what's happening in, you know, in a given day, and what's, you know, what's going on with your child. So let's assume that, you know, you've had that meeting, you know, it's October, you're checking in, you know, things are not going particularly smoothly, or, you know, your child is, you're seeing a lot of these cues that we talked about. Child, you know, your student doesn't want to go to school. There's a lot of things going on. What then? You've had the meeting, you know, you scheduled the meeting. What do you ask for in that meeting? How do you, you know, move to the next step in problem solving for your student?
I
Who
was
wants
trying
to
to
start?
wait.
Yeah, I'm pausing as well, letting someone else.
I was trying to wait.
I
I
think
was
it,
like, did I ask a
think
really
it-
like, did I ask a stumper? Like, I don't feel like
No,
I,
no,
it
it's a
just
great
depends.
question.
It just depends.
I'm trying to
It
get this light away. Sorry.
it depends. It depends on the situation. It depends on the kid. If it's something that your team is also seeing and you're collaborating and they want to try something different, then maybe you write a new objective or a new goal in. Maybe maybe they're adding more services, adjusting services. Maybe it's rapport with a certain staff member. If they don't have rapport, that happens. They don't have
Right,
rapport.
right,
So maybe
absolutely.
they're going to try somebody else. Maybe you need an assessment. Maybe you need an evaluation. It
But-
just depends.
I would say that this goes back to what we were discussing earlier in this webinar about having that open communication via email, writing for everything. So that way it could be a very simple fix that you don't know. Oh, you know what? They were sitting next to Jimmy and Jimmy's no good for Timmy. So
Right.
I separated them and now we're all good.
right.
But if it's something that we see that Jimmy and Timmy are now still having issues in many other places, then yeah, now you've got documentation.
Right.
And you can go to the table saying, hey team, this is something I've now brought to you a few times. In fact, you have brought it back to me too. What are we going to do now? And then, right as Stacey was saying, there may be need for goals and objectives or the shift in services.
Evaluations, you know,
Yeah.
Evaluations,
assessments,
yeah.
all that kind of thing.
The big thing is coming together with an action plan. Right. So often you come into a meeting like this and everybody's verbalizing, I saw this, I saw this, I saw this. Oh, our time is up now.
Yeah.
No. So
What do you suggest? What are we going to do? Yeah.
So it's important to kind of come in with your established questions and concerns and tell the team, listen, I really want to use our time so that we leave here with an action plan. What's our next step? So that we all know what it is, we all know what we're doing. And then after that meeting, follow up with an email. You get the theme here.
Yeah.
Follow up with an email to say, this was what we discussed. These are what we outlined. And here's where I left the meeting feeling like our action plan was. And I can't wait to hear back from you in a week and a half or 2 weeks to tell me how this is all going.
How this is
whatever
working out.
you decide on.
How our adjustment is working out.
Right.
And it doesn't hurt to send those questions to the team ahead of time.
Right.
It gives them a time to digest, because you can imagine if someone came up to you asking you 10, 15 questions, you're going to feel defensive and feeling like you have to like combat everything. But if you know exactly what's coming at you, you're prepared to give a better answer.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yep.
Which is why I sent you the questions to this beforehand. I'm just kidding. I didn't.
No, she didn't.
No, she didn't.
Listen, I moved the child into college like earlier this week, so a lot of stuff just didn't happen. I apologize, but that's great advice, because also, you remember that, a school team has many, many children, many students under their purview, and they might not necessarily, have that recall in the moment about like what specific issue is going on with a specific child. And it's not even like, I just think it helps with, some of the things that we've been talking about, particularly with what, Allie alluded to earlier, which is the collaboration, element of what we're talking about. Everybody feels better when they're prepared, and everybody's going to do better when they're prepared. So I think that's a great point.
And your questions might tell that case manager or that general education teacher, you know what? They're really concerned with math. I'm going to bring the math specialist to this meeting to answer some more questions.
Mhm.
And you would not have even known maybe that there was a math specialist.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, though, I think what we're talking about is a PPT, because you mentioned that after all of the steps, you've gone to the team meetings, you've gone to the teachers. That next step, if you haven't been satisfied, is to have a PPT, because at a PPT, you have a legal document,
Right,
and it's all documented. And if you feel
official things are happening.
official, and if it's not written, it doesn't exist.
Right.
In
Absolutely.
the future.
Well, and that goes to Stacey's point as well, Allie, about what the issue is. If it's a rapport issue with the paraeducator, that's a team meeting discussion. If it's that we're not getting enough bang for our buck with the reading program, that's a PPT discussion.
Mhm.
We stretch right ahead to that.
Mhm.
And the issue is, but I think what we were talking about is if we've gone the mile and we've
Yeah.
covered everything and you're not satisfied, you can still document something at a PPT.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
So I think that's the last, not that it's the last resort, because it's a good resort. I don't want to put a negative spin on it.
Right.
But often it ends up at a PPT because it is documentation.
Now, can you talk a little bit for the parents, because we're using, we've talked about team meetings and PPT meetings, can you just talk a little bit about, what the difference is between those two and what we're discussing?
Well, a team meeting is not a legal format.
Mhm.
Okay, so anybody that has any relevance to the student can be at a team meeting, and oftentimes a team meeting is requested by the family. It doesn't
Mhm.
have to be, but often it is. So the family can ask certain people to attend the team meeting, whether could be a lunch aid if we had, or it could be the para, or it could be
Speech therapist or whatever.
whatever the situation is. It's much less formal. In fact, it's pretty informal.
Mhm.
But again, I like to suggest to my clients to come prepared with a prior agenda, so it is structured and everybody knows before that meeting what the focus or the questions will be. So that's a team meeting. There could be agenda, but it doesn't have to be. A
Mhm.
PPT, however, is a legal meeting. You complete a legal document, which is the IEP, the Individual Educational Program, and the everything is documented on this legal paperwork. And the participants in this PPT have to be of a certain nature. And correct me if I'm wrong, team, but there has to be an administrator or an administrator designee. There has to be, if it's a PPT, it's special education teacher,
Mhm.
has to be a related service provider, which means either a psychologist, a social worker, physical therapist, an OT, or a speech and language person.
General ed teacher?
Pardon?
General ed teacher?
That was my last one.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. You took the words out of my mouth, Christine. In the general ed teacher. So
Mhm.
you have to have a designated form, basically.
Mhm.
And the parent.
And
Most
parent.
important.
Parents
And
are,
the student in some
and the
cases.
student,
You,
are over this. Well, first of all, a student in high school has to be invited.
Mhm.
He or she does not have to attend. At 18, the student becomes what was it, self endorsed, whatever, you know, they
An adult purportedly.
is illegal
Reportedly.
of himself or herself. However, that student, even if he or she is 18, can give written permission to a parent or a guardian to act in their absence. And I just had that the other day when the parents felt that their 18-year-old was not really able to sit through the PPT, and certainly wouldn't be appropriate for him to do that. So a written, letter was sent to the administrator. So, you know, I think there is a big difference, and certainly depending upon the nature or the purpose of the PPT, there has to be specific areas of the IEP filled out. If it's a review and revise IEP, then what are the goals and objectives that the student has and what has to be revised? If it's an eligibility PPT and you're determining if it's an eligibility, you go through the eligibility criteria and the team determines that. So depending upon the nature and the purpose of the PPT.
But one of the things that I just want to point out is that between a team meeting and a PPT, team meetings are typically easier and faster to schedule. So it's great for those limited issues that we were discussing that could be covered in a short period of time. But that's something to think about also. Is this what we teach our kids? Is this a big problem or a little problem? Is this one that's going to impact programming, or is this one that this is just a discussion and using that type of judgment?
In terms of the PPT meeting, can somebody talk through, how one should request a PPT meeting? Because I know that, parents sometimes, at least I get those questions, I ask for, how do you go about asking for a PPT meeting?
In an email.
Write it down.
You are putting it in an email. I'm saying it again. The
Email.
E in email
Write it
is for
down.
evidence.
I
You
would
are saying you
Yep.
have concerns, you think that requires evaluations, and you would like to have a PPT to discuss suspected areas of disability. You are putting it, I can't say it enough, in an email.
And I would write that not only to the teacher, but also to the administrator in your school building, because the teachers may not always know what they're supposed to do with that email. So make sure the administrator,
And how long sorry, go ahead, Allie. Sorry.
If it's a referral to special education, I mean, certainly you can write an email, but there's also a form that needs to be filled out and signed. If, as a parent, you feel that you want to refer your child to the PPT as a student with possible special education needs. So there is a referral form that you can fill out.
That referral form is the ED 621 referral to special education form. Yes, but a lot of parents don't know how to access it. Especially I saw one parent ask, how do I get access to CT SEDS? It's on the state's website if you Google ED 621 form. But that email also suffices as your referral to the process. And that email starts a clock. It starts that 45-day timeline for that referral process.
So that brings up a great point, the 45-day timeline when you are beginning the special education referral process. Assuming that this is not a referral for special education, how long does the district have to schedule a PPT once you've asked for it?
Reasonable amount of time.
Awful. Isn't that awful?
Yeah. Reasonable amount of time. Okay.
It's very, very gray.
See, I generally, I think of the term best practice, right? So best practice is to respond to every email within 24 to 48 hours and to respond to every request for a meeting within a week. So to me, that's reasonable. Maybe not everybody agrees, but that's the standard. And if I have pushback or issue, I will loop in an extra administrator to the discussion
Right,
in order to help them and remind them of the 45
Right.
days if it's an initial referral. But
Right.
if it's the general one, it's just,
Mhm.
yeah.
It's just reasonable amount of time. But I get that question a lot. You know, it's been
Yeah.
2 weeks.
Yep.
You know, the meeting hasn't been scheduled. What do I do? How long do they have? And, you know, I mean, you know, unfortunately, in this particular, you know, 2 weeks is within that reasonable time frame. You know, I guess if they're looking like they're making, you know, some efforts at scheduling it, and they're trying to get this person and that person. I mean, you know, it's a little bit of a Tetris game, I think, trying to get a time that fits all of these people. So, you know, I like to, you know, to be a little sympathetic to the scheduling gods, but at the same time, you know, it's like, you know, what's reasonable? How long, you know, should this, you know, family have to wait to, you know, to have that meeting to discuss their issues? This has
If
been
it's
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, if it's been more than 5 days and you haven't gotten a response, not saying,
Right.
then that's not reasonable. And
Right.
just as you said, you're starting with the gen ed teacher. They haven't responded. You're adding the assistant principal, the
Mhm.
director of special education on the same email where you made the
Right.
initial request.
Right.
Because at some point, someone's gonna say, guys, why is no one writing this mother back?
Right. Right. I love CCing the world. I mean, I'm a big fan of CC. This has been a tremendous discussion. It's just about 8 o'clock now. And, you know, as kind of a wrap up, you know, what are, like, you know, what's the number one thing that a parent should do at the beginning of the school year for their kid in special education? Stacey, you go first.
Email. I think that's the theme of the night is
Yes.
email, your introduction to your kid, to yourself, and ask for the schedule. So you, that would be mine.
Dani?
Frame yourself as the ally collaborator. What can I do? What are you noticing at school that I can now be supporting at home? And utilizing that open communication.
Like, how do we provide holistic support throughout the day for this child?
Yeah. So even for my own kiddos, start of school year, I sent an email already. I said, hey guys, we are very involved. Tell me whatever you need us to do to be supportive, and we will do it on our end.
Perfect. Allie?
I would agree, email, and we mentioned before, add a picture because that does personalize it. And also you may want to, in that email, make sure that you give contact numbers and hours that are best for you. If contact is better by email or phone or texting, whatever mode or modality. But, you know, I think teachers are inundated. I mean, as a former public school special ed teacher and administrator, in the beginning of the year is tough for everybody. So you want to make sure that email is succinct. Like you said, Dani, it's friendly. You want to present very collaboratively and with a positive note. You don't want to start with the nays. You want to start with the yays. Okay. That's my take on it.
Great. Jill?
So I'm going to go with a little bit different of a lens there. I'm going to tell everybody to breathe. Because every single person I meet, every family I work with who has a child with a specialized needs, be it a 504 or an IEP, they have had negative experiences. I've never met anyone who have negative experience. And that makes me sad, but I know that's the reality. And it's why all of us are so busy all the time, right? And I wish that wasn't the case. But I encourage everyone to kind of take care of themselves and to breathe and to remind themselves that they are their child's best advocate, that they do know their child the best, and to put your best foot forward to the best of your ability. And I've used the word best way too many times there, but just to understand that you can do this. And it's hard and it's scary sometimes and it's frustrating, but you can do this. And finding groups like the Special Education Legal Fund and finding special education PTA groups and
And
friends
other
who have kids
families.
with
Yep.
needs,
Mhm.
other families, is going to save you and
Mhm.
help you to breathe and to use humor too. I don't think I would have survived parenting my 3 children who they're kind of older now, but I'm still parenting them, right? You can't survive it without that. So the advice that the other 3 advocates gave, I echo everything with that. And I couldn't have said it better myself. I'm trying to give everyone permission to breathe and to be ready to move forward and to smile. And I think Allie said it towards the beginning of the webinar as well, to frame things as this can be a positive experience. And give that a try.
Give it a try.
It's not always going to work. It's not always
Start
going
the
to work.
year with
friends.
hope. Start the year with hope and joy.
Exactly.
Thank you
Exactly.
everyone so much for joining us this evening. I have put our website in the chat, but it is www.spedlegalfund.org. And on that website, if you go to how to apply, you can start the application process for a self-grant. You can also find our past recordings of webinars, as well as register for new ones if you visit the watch page or read previous blogs and work that we've done in in this area. But thank you everyone so much for joining us. Thank you to our amazing panel of advocates. I love all of you. And you are amazing. I did not touch the Q&A once, which is a tremendous experience for me because usually I do that really, really poorly and slowly. So thank you, Jill and Dani and Stacey and Allie for this great discussion. And be well. Have a great
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Take care, everybody.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye.